While I was in emergency surgery, my parents refused to take care of my twins, saying I was a nuisance and a burden because they had tickets to see Elton John with my sister. So I called a nanny from my hospital bed, broke all family ties, and stopped giving them my financial support. 2 weeks later, I heard a knock. Before I start the story, please subscribe to the channel. I never thought a moment of desperation would show me the truth about my own family. But that night, as I lay in a hospital bed, clutching my phone with shaking hands, I learned exactly where I stood in their lives. It all started with a sharp, unbearable pain in my stomach. At first, I thought I could push through it. I had no choice. I was home alone with my twin toddlers, and their innocent giggles filled the room as they played. But then, the pain twisted deep inside me, so sharp that I collapsed to the floor. My vision blurred. My breath came out in short gasps. Something was terribly wrong. I barely managed to dial 911 before everything faded into a haze of sirens, paramedics, and bright hospital lights. But even through the panic, one thought screamed in my mind: my babies. Who would take care of them? Lying on the hospital bed, a nurse hovering over me, I fumbled for my phone and called the only people I could rely on, my parents. The moment my mum answered, relief flooded through me. "Mom," I croaked, my voice weak, "please, I need help. I'm in the hospital. I need you to take the twins." There was a pause, then a light chuckle. "Oh, honey," she said, "tonight's not a good time." "What?" My heart pounded. "Mom, I don't have anyone else, please." "We have Elton John tickets," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Front row. Do you know how much we paid for these?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mom, I'm about to go into emergency surgery. I don't know what's going to happen." "Don't be dramatic," she scoffed. "You always make everything a crisis. You're such a nuisance and a burden sometimes." A nuisance? A burden? I was fighting for breath, for my life, and my own mother couldn't be bothered. Then, before I could respond, I heard my sister's voice in the background, laughing. "Mom, come on, we're going to be late." And just like that, they hung up. I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling. They were gone, and I was completely alone. Lying in that hospital bed, I felt like the walls were closing in on me. My heart pounded so hard it hurt, but it wasn't just from the pain in my body. It was the panic, the sheer helplessness of knowing my babies were at home with no one to care for them. I tried calling my parents again, even though I knew it was useless. Straight to voicemail. I tried my sister next, hoping, praying she'd have at least a shred of decency. But all I got was a text back. "At the concert, can't talk." That was it. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. They were really gone. They didn't care. I didn't have time to break down. My babies needed me. My hands were trembling as I searched online, looking for emergency babysitting services. I had never used one before. I never thought I'd need to. Family was supposed to be there for moments like this. After what felt like an eternity, I found a nanny agency that offered last-minute placements. My voice shook as I explained the situation, begging them to help. The woman on the phone was calm, professional. Within minutes, she arranged for a nanny to head to my house. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly drowned by something else. Anger. While I lay there, barely holding myself together, my parents and sister were out there, clapping and singing along to Rocket Man like nothing was wrong. They weren't thinking about me. They weren't worrying about my kids. I imagined them laughing, dancing, posting pictures of their amazing night. Meanwhile, I was about to be wheeled into surgery, not knowing if I'd wake up. The betrayal burned deep. I had always helped them. I gave them money when they needed it. I showed up for every family event. I never asked for anything in return. And the one time I needed them, they turned their backs without a second thought. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling something inside me shift. If they didn't need me in their lives that night, then they wouldn't need me at all. When I woke up after the surgery, everything felt hazy. My body ached, My throat was dry, and for a few seconds, I didn't even remember where I was. Then it hit me. The hospital, the emergency surgery, the fact that I had been completely alone through all of it. I turned my head slowly, hoping, just maybe, that I'd see my parents sitting beside my bed, that they had realized what they had done and rushed over to check on me. But the chair next to me was empty. Of course it was. I let out a slow breath, staring at the ceiling. They didn't come. They hadn't even called. I had spent the entire night fighting through pain and fear, and the people who were supposed to love me the most were too busy singing along at a concert to care. A nurse came in to check my vitals, and I forced myself to ask about my twins. The nanny had sent updates. My babies were fine, safe, and sound. That was all that mattered. But as I lay there in that quiet hospital room, I made my decision. I was done. For years, I had been my parents' safety net. Whenever they needed help, I was there. I paid for things when they were struggling. I sent them money every month just to make sure they were comfortable. And my sister, she never lifted a finger because I was always there, picking up the slack. Not anymore. I grabbed my phone, and for the first time in my life, I blocked their numbers. Then, with a deep breath, I logged into my bank account and cut off every single payment I had been making for them. The money for their bills? Gone. The monthly deposits? Gone. My father's car insurance that I had been covering for years? Cancelled. I wasn't their personal ATM anymore. No more last-minute transfers, no more guilt-tripping me into paying for things, no more pretending we were a family when, in reality, they had shown me exactly how much I meant to them. As I set my phone down, I felt something unexpected. Relief. I had lost my so-called family that night. But maybe, just maybe, I had finally found my freedom. The first day after I got home from the hospital, I kept my phone close. A small, stupid part of me still hoped. Maybe they'd realize what they had done. Maybe they'd feel guilty. Maybe I'd wake up to a missed call or a message from my mom asking if I was okay. But my phone stayed silent. The second day passed, then the third. Nothing. No calls, no texts, not even a lazy, "hope you're feeling better" message from my sister. It was like I had vanished from their world overnight. I shouldn't have been surprised. I knew they didn't care. I knew they had chosen a concert over me, but there was still that deep, aching part of me that wanted to be wrong, that wanted them to prove me wrong. They didn't. I thought about calling them just once. Just to see. But then I stopped myself. I refused to be the one always chasing, always reaching out, always begging for love that should have been given freely. Instead, I focused on my babies. I hugged them tighter, kissed their little faces more times than I could count. I let their laughter fill the silence my family left behind. But at night, when the house was quiet, the pain crept in. I kept thinking back to everything I had done for them. All the times I had gone out of my way to help them, to make their lives easier. And now, I was recovering from surgery, alone, and it didn't even cross their minds to check if I was still breathing. It was a different kind of hurt, the kind that settled deep in your bones, the kind that made you question everything. But through that pain, something else grew. Certainty. I had made the right choice. They had shown me exactly where I stood in their lives, and I had finally believed them. I wasn't going to chase people who had already made it clear that I was disposable. I wasn't going to beg for love from a family that had none to give. So I sat in that silence, and I let it wash over me. It wasn't empty. It wasn't lonely. It was freedom. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of silence. 2 weeks of them pretending I didn't exist. I had almost convinced myself that this was my new normal, peaceful, quiet, without their drama hanging over my head. I was getting used to it. I was healing, both physically and emotionally. My twins were happy, and for the first time in forever, I wasn't carrying the weight of my family's problems on my shoulders. Then came the knock. It was loud, urgent, the kind of knocking that made your stomach twist. My twins, playing in the living room, jumped at the sound. I frowned, wiping my hands on my shirt as I walked toward the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Peering through the peephole, my heart skipped. There they were, my parents and my sister. My mum's face was tight with stress, my dad looked furious, and my sister, the one who had laughed in the background while I begged for help, stood with her arms crossed, shifting uncomfortably. I didn't move. I just stood there, staring. For 2 weeks, they didn't care if I was alive or dead. And now, suddenly, they were at my door, looking desperate. Something was wrong. I could feel it. The old me, the one who always rushed to fix their problems, who always picked up the pieces, would have thrown the door open, let them in, asked what was wrong, and tried to help. But I wasn't that person anymore. Instead, I just stood there, watching them through the peephole, letting the seconds stretch. The knocking came again, harder this time. My father muttered something under his breath, and my mother glanced nervously at my sister, who looked like she wanted to be anywhere but here. They needed something, and deep in my gut, I already knew. It wasn't me they wanted. It was what I could do for them. I took a slow breath, gripping the doorknob. I had a choice to make, and this time, for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to make it for them. I was going to make it for me. I finally opened the door, but I didn't step aside to let them in. I just stood there, arms crossed, waiting. My mother tried to smile, but it was shaky. My father cleared his throat like he was about to launch into some grand speech. My sister wouldn't even meet my eyes. Something was wrong. I didn't say anything. I wanted them to speak first. I wanted to hear why, after 2 weeks of silence, they were suddenly here, pounding on my door like the world was ending. And then, just as I expected, the truth spilled out. They were in trouble, deep trouble. My father had lost his job, some company-wide layoffs or something. My mother's medical bills were piling up, and they couldn't afford her treatments anymore. And my sister, her little boutique business, the one she loved bragging about, was on the verge of shutting down. And guess what? They needed money. Not love, not an apology, not even a simple, "How are you feeling?" Just money. I almost laughed. The irony was too much. 2 weeks ago, when I was at my lowest, when I was in a hospital bed with no one to turn to, they had ignored me. I had begged for their help, and they had brushed me off like I was nothing. But now that they were struggling, now they suddenly remembered I existed. I tilted my head, pretending to think. "Oh, that's awful," I said, my voice calm. "I really hope you figure something out." The panic in their eyes was instant. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's smile faltered. My sister actually gasped. "You don't understand," my mother pleaded. "We're really struggling." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I understand." Then I gave them the same exact treatment they gave me. I shrugged. My father turned red. My sister stammered. My mother actually had the nerve to reach for my hand, but I pulled away. Because the truth was, I did understand. I understood exactly how little I meant to them when they didn't need me. So I gave them the only thing they had given me. Nothing. And then, just as they had done to me 2 weeks ago, I shut the door in their faces. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching them fidget under my silence. They were desperate. I could see it. My father kept clearing his throat like he was trying to find the right words. My mother's hands were wringing together, and my sister, she looked like she wanted to disappear. I let them talk. I let them explain their situation, let them lay out all their problems like I was supposed to swoop in and fix everything. It was almost amusing, watching them struggle to make their case without outright begging. My father tried to make it seem like it was just a temporary setback. My mother went for guilt, saying, "We're still family," as if that meant something now. My sister barely said a word. She just stood there, avoiding my eyes, shifting from foot to foot, like she couldn't wait to get this over with. When they finally stopped talking, I let the silence stretch. Then I smiled. "Oh," I said slowly, my voice sweet. "You need me now?" Their faces flickered with hope. "But," I tilted my head, "I'm just a burden, remember?" And just like that, their expressions crumbled. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. My father's jaw tightened. My sister's face turned red. I waited for them to deny it, to say that's not what they meant, that it was a misunderstanding, that they were sorry. But none of them said a word, because they knew. They knew what they had done. They knew the words they had spoken. And now that they were on the receiving end of rejection, they finally understood how it felt. I let out a small, amused breath. "Funny how things change, huh?" My mother tried one last time. "Sweetheart, we didn't mean—" I held up a hand, cutting her off. "I meant what I said when I cut you off." I stepped back. "And I meant what I did when I blocked you." Then, without another word, I shut the door. And this time, I felt nothing. As the door clicked shut, a wave of relief washed over me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one begging. I wasn't the one chasing after their approval, their love, their validation. I wasn't the desperate one anymore. They were. I leaned against the door, listening for a moment. I could hear their muffled voices, my mother's frantic whispers, my father's sharp tone, my sister's frustrated sighs. I didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. They were shocked. Shocked that I had actually stood my ground. Shocked that I didn't fall into my usual role of fixing their problems, but I had nothing left to give them. Not after what they had done. They had shut me out when I needed them the most. And now? Now they knew what it felt like. And the best part? I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little. I walked away from the door, my heart feeling lighter than it had in years. I had spent my whole life bending over backward for them, always making excuses, always hoping that one day they'd change. But they never did. And this time, I was the one who walked away. I picked up my twins, holding them close. They were my real family. They were the ones who mattered, the ones who would never have to question if they were loved. I kissed the tops of their heads, breathing in their warmth, their innocence. I had spent so long trying to hold on to people who didn't deserve me. But now I was finally free. And that was the ultimate payback. That night, as I tucked my twins into bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. No more worrying about my parents' approval. No more bending over backward to prove my worth to people who never truly cared. No more guilt weighing me down. It was just me and my babies, my real family. I sat on the edge of the bed, stroking my daughter's hair as her eyes fluttered shut. My son reached for my hand, his tiny fingers curling around mine, trusting, safe. This was what mattered. Not the people who shared my blood, but the people who truly loved me. The people who would never turn their backs on me. I thought back to that hospital room, lying there in pain, scared, alone. I had begged my parents for help, believing that surely this time they would step up. That surely when it mattered most they would prove that they were more than just words. But they hadn't. They had laughed. They had called me a burden. And they had left me there to figure it out on my own. That moment had broken something in me, but maybe, just maybe, it was something that needed to break. Because now I saw things clearly. Family isn't about blood. It isn't about obligation, or guilt, or years of history. It's about who shows up. It's about who holds your hand when you're scared. It's about who picks you up when you fall. It's about who loves you without conditions. And my parents, my sister, they had shown me exactly who they were, so I had given them exactly what they gave me. Nothing. I pressed a kiss to each of my twins' foreheads, pulling the blankets up around them. They were safe. They were loved. And for the first time, so was I. Not because of my parents, not because of anyone else, but because I chose me.